What if one of the world's most critical shipping lanes could be switched off like a tap, not as an act of war, but as a calculated act of retaliation? According to sources cited by Reuters, that's exactly the contingency Iran has quietly communicated to the Houthis. If the United States strikes Iran's power network, Tehran wants the Houthis to shut down the Red Sea gateway. That's a serious escalation in the logic of deterrence, and it has implications that stretch far beyond the Middle East. Let's start with what Reuters is actually reporting. According to sources who spoke to the outlet exclusively, Iran has privately instructed the Houthi movement in Yemen to close the Red Sea gateway if the United States carries out strikes against Iran's power infrastructure. This is described as a contingency order, a conditional message, not a declaration of immediate action. The sources are described as being familiar with the matter, and Reuters is treating this as exclusive intelligence. Now, a few things worth noting right away. This is not an official statement from Tehran. It has not been confirmed publicly by any government, and the Houthis themselves have not announced this as policy. What we're dealing with is a reported back-channel directive, the kind of communication that happens in the shadows of geopolitical standoffs. But the fact that Reuters is reporting it with sourcing suggests it's being taken seriously in intelligence and diplomatic circles. The framing is important too. This isn't Iran saying it will attack the Red Sea. It's Iran reportedly telling a proxy force to use a specific pressure point, the Red Sea gateway, as leverage in the event of a very specific American action: strikes on Iran's power network. That's a layered, conditional threat, and unpacking it tells us a lot about how modern deterrence actually works. So why the Red Sea, and why the power network? Let's take these one at a time. The Red Sea is one of the most important maritime corridors on the planet. Roughly 12 to 15% of global trade passes through it, connecting Asian manufacturing hubs to European markets via the Suez Canal. When that route is disrupted, cargo doesn't disappear. It gets rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, which adds weeks to transit times and significant cost to shipping. We've already seen in recent years how Houthi attacks on commercial vessels in and around the Red Sea created genuine disruption for global supply chains. So the threat of closing the Red Sea gateway isn't hypothetical. It's based on demonstrated capability. The Houthis have shown they can make that waterway dangerous enough that major shipping companies divert their vessels. Now, Iran's power network. Why would the United States potentially target that? In any military confrontation with Iran, one strategic option on the table is striking infrastructure that sustains the regime, and electricity generation is central to that. Power outages at scale affect military command systems, economic activity, civilian life, and political stability. A strike on Iran's power network would be a serious escalation, not a surgical strike on a weapons facility, but an attack on national infrastructure. Iran, it seems, has decided that such an attack warrants an equally serious response, and their chosen instrument of retaliation is not a missile strike on a U.S. base. It's choking a global trade artery through a proxy. This brings us to the mechanism, and it's worth understanding how this kind of proxy deterrence actually functions. Iran and the Houthis have what analysts describe as an axis of influence, sometimes called the axis of resistance. It's a network of non-state actors, including groups in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, that Iran supports politically, financially, and militarily. The Houthis have been part of this network for years, receiving weapons, training, and strategic guidance from Tehran. The relationship isn't a simple chain of command. The Houthis have their own leadership, their own domestic agenda, and their own motivations, rooted primarily in Yemen's civil war. But on questions of broader regional strategy, Particularly when it comes to confrontations with the United States and Israel, they tend to align closely with Iranian objectives. So, when Iran reportedly sends a contingency message to the Houthis, it's not issuing a military order the way a general commands a unit. It's more like a strategic signal. Here is what we want you to do if X happens. Whether the Houthis act on it depends on their own calculation of costs and benefits. But historically, when Iran has directed its proxy network to act, there has been a high degree of coordination. Now, closing the Red Sea gateway would likely mean intensifying attacks on commercial shipping in the region, making the passage dangerous enough that insurers and shipping companies decide the risk isn't worth it. Disruptions of this kind tend to lift what the industry calls war risk premiums, the additional cost insurers charge to cover vessels transiting dangerous waters. When those premiums rise sharply, shipping companies often find it cheaper to reroute entirely, even if it adds thousands of miles to the journey. The economic ripple effects move outward from there: higher freight costs, longer delivery times, and upward pressure on the price of goods that travel that route. So, what does this actually mean if it plays out? Let's think through the layers. At the geopolitical level, this reported directive represents a significant hardening of Iran's deterrence posture. It suggests Tehran is actively thinking through how to impose costs on the United States beyond its own borders and beyond its own direct military capabilities. That's a shift worth watching. Proxy deterrence of this kind is harder to counter than a direct military threat because responding to it requires navigating the politics of Yemen, the dynamics of the Houthi movement, and the risk of further escalation. At the economic level, the Red Sea is not just a shipping lane. It's a pressure point for the global economy. Europe is particularly exposed, given how much of its trade with Asia moves through the Suez Canal, but the effects wouldn't be contained to any one region. Supply chains are global, and delays in one part of the system cascade through the rest. At the diplomatic level, this report adds pressure to already tense U.S.-Iran relations. If the United States is weighing military options against Iran, and there is no shortage of public reporting suggesting that's being discussed, then the reported contingency order raises the stakes considerably. A strike on Iran's power network now carries an explicitly flagged second-order consequence: possible closure of one of the world's most critical trade routes. That's the kind of calculation that shapes military planning. So how do we classify what's happening here? This is an act of strategic signaling, a conditional threat delivered through back channels reported by a credible news organization, and almost certainly intended to be heard in Washington. In the language of deterrence theory, this is what's called an extended deterrent communicated through a proxy. Iran is saying, if you hit something we value deeply, our power infrastructure, we will hit something you value deeply, global trade through the Red Sea. It's escalation management through threatened escalation. Whether it works depends on whether decision-makers in Washington believe the threat is credible. And the Houthis' track record of actually disrupting Red Sea shipping gives them a baseline of credibility that most proxy forces don't have. What this is not, at least based on what Reuters is reporting, is an imminent attack. It's a contingency, a conditional. The trigger hasn't been pulled. But in geopolitics, the line between a contingency order and an active one can close very quickly. This is a story to watch carefully. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe to Investors Club Global for more clear-headed analysis of the financial and geopolitical stories that actually move markets. And if you want to go deeper on how the Red Sea crisis has been reshaping global shipping economics, we've covered that in detail. Check the link in the description. Drop your questions in the comments. We read them, and they shape what we cover next.